The morning they let me go, I was in the middle of eating a granola bar at my desk. That's the detail that stays with me. Not the conversation itself, not the HR woman's face, not the elevator ride down afterward. Just that half-eaten granola bar sitting on a napkin, and me thinking I'd be back to finish it in 10 minutes. I wasn't. My name is Ted Harmon. I spent 11 years building pipeline inspection systems for Meridian Infrastructure Group, a mid-size engineering firm out of Columbus, Ohio. We worked mainly with municipal water authorities and natural gas distributors. Not glamorous work, but serious work. The kind of work where if someone cuts corners, people get hurt. I was their director of field operations, 43 years old, married to my college sweetheart, 2 kids in middle school, mortgage on a house in Westerville that still had 11 years left on it. Normal life. Good life. I had no idea it was about to fall apart. The project that changed everything was called the Lakeview Corridor Expansion, a natural gas distribution upgrade covering 4 counties in central Ohio, new pipeline segments, updated valve stations, pressure monitoring upgrades. The contract was worth $68 million. We'd been competing for it for 2 years. I was the one who landed it, not officially, not on paper. On paper, the credit went to my boss, a man named Greg Stanton, who had the title of VP of Business Development and the handshake relationships with the county commissioners. But the technical proposal, the one that beat out 3 national firms, that was mine. 18 months of site assessments, regulatory research, cost modeling. I drove those roads myself. I knew every inch of that corridor. When the contract was awarded in March, Greg took the team out for steaks. He gave a toast. He mentioned my name once, in passing, somewhere between thanking the CFO and complimenting the catering. I didn't say anything. I was used to it by then. What I wasn't used to was what came next. My employment contract at Meridian had an unusual clause in it. I'd negotiated it 5 years earlier when the company was trying to keep me from jumping to a competitor. My attorney at the time, a sharp woman named Beverly, who I still send a Christmas card to every year, had pushed hard for it. The clause stated that if I was terminated without cause, I was entitled to a completion bonus equal to 3% of the total contract value of any project I had been the primary technical lead on during the 12 months preceding my termination, provided that project had been awarded and was in active execution at the time of my separation. 3% sounds small. 3% of $68 million is $2,040,000. Greg knew about the clause. He'd been in the room when I signed the revised contract. He'd shaken my hand and said, genuinely, that he thought it was fair. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't know until much later, was that by the time the Lakeview contract was awarded, Greg was no longer the same person who had shaken my hand. The troubles started quietly, the way it always does. In June, 2 months after we'd begun mobilizing for Lakeview, I noticed irregularities in the subcontractor billing reports. Not enormous numbers at first. A $12,000 equipment rental charge for a piece of machinery I knew we hadn't used on site. A labor invoice for 40 hours from a crew that had only been deployed for 22. I flagged it to our project accountant, a quiet man named Ted. Sorry, I mean a quiet man named Douglas. No, wait. I'm getting ahead of myself. I flagged it internally, informally. The response I got was vague. We're looking into it. There may have been a coding error. Thanks for the heads up, Ted. A week later, I mentioned it again. This time the response was cooler. We've reviewed it. It's fine. It wasn't fine. Over the next 6 weeks, I kept a private spreadsheet on my personal laptop, every billing discrepancy I could document. By August, I had cataloged just over $340,000 in charges that I couldn't reconcile with actual field activity. Some of it was sloppy. Some of it was something else. I didn't know who to trust. Greg was my direct superior and the most logical person to raise this with. But Greg was also the one who had approved most of the subcontractor selections. I thought about going to the CFO, a woman named Irene, but Irene and Greg had worked together for 9 years and I had no idea where her loyalties were, so I sat on it. Kept documenting. Kept showing up to work every morning, eating my granola bar, doing my job. That was my first mistake, I think, not the sitting on it. That part was probably wise. The mistake was thinking I had more time. On a Tuesday in late September, I was called into a conference room I'd never had a meeting in before. It was on the executive floor, which I visited maybe once a month. The HR director was there, a woman from legal I'd seen once at a company holiday party, and Greg. He didn't look at me when I walked in. The HR director did the talking. She was professional about it, measured. She said the company had decided to restructure the field operations division, that my position was being eliminated, and that today would be my last day. She slid a separation agreement across the table. 2 weeks of severance for each year of service. 22 weeks total, which came to a little over $40,000 before taxes. I looked at the paper. I looked at Greg. He was studying the table. "Is this a termination without cause?" I asked. The HR director said yes, it was a restructuring. No performance issues. No misconduct. The role itself was being eliminated. "Okay," I said. I didn't sign the separation agreement. I said I'd need to review it with my attorney. The HR director said that was fine. I had 21 days. She handed me a box for my personal items and walked me to my desk. I finished my granola bar on the way to the parking garage. I don't know why, it seemed important to finish it. In the car, I sat for about 10 minutes without starting the engine. I wasn't panicking. I want to be clear about that. My chest was tight. The way it gets when something big shifts and your body knows it before your brain catches up. But I wasn't panicking. I was thinking about the clause. I pulled out my phone and texted Beverly. Just 4 words. "Call me when you can." She called me back in 7 minutes. I told her what had happened. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always appreciated about her. When I finished, she said, "Do you have your contract?" "Soft copy on my personal drive." "Good. Don't sign anything. Come see me Thursday." I didn't sign anything. Come see me Thursday. I didn't sign anything. Beverly's office is in a building downtown that still has the kind of lobby with marble floors and a security desk where a guy in a blazer checks your ID. I've always liked that about it. It feels serious in a way that matters. She'd read the contract before I got there. She had it printed out on her desk with 4 or 5 yellow sticky notes on different pages. She tapped the clause with her pen. "This is clean," she said. "Your language is tight. Primary, technical lead, project awarded. Active execution at time of separation. To have documentation." I had brought my laptop. I walked her through 2 years of internal emails, project proposal drafts with my name in the document metadata, site assessment reports I had authored, field blogs I had personally submitted. I showed her the contract award notification, which had gone to my work email and which I had forwarded to my personal email the same day it arrived, a habit I'd had for years without ever consciously thinking about why. Beverly looked at everything carefully. Then she looked at me. "Ted," she said, "they owe you $2,040,000. I already knew that. Hearing someone else say it out loud was a different thing. "They're going to push back," I said. "Of course they are, but their position is weak. The only argument they have is that you weren't the primary technical lead. And based on what you've shown me, that argument falls apart quickly." She paused. "There's something else." I waited. "You mentioned billing discrepancies. How documented is that?" I told her about the spreadsheet. She was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said, "here's what I think is actually happening." What Beverly thought, and what I had begun to suspect myself, was that I hadn't been let go because of a restructuring. I had been let go because someone had figured out that I was onto the billing irregularities, and removing me was cleaner than dealing with what I might do with the information. It made a certain cold logic. If you're a project manager who's been inflating subcontractor invoices by a few $100,000, and you find out your director of field operations has been keeping a private spreadsheet, the easiest solution is to eliminate the position. They just hadn't thought through the contract, or maybe they had thought through the contract and decided the cost was worth it. Pay me off with a separation agreement, keep the situation quiet, move on. What they hadn't counted on was that I wouldn't sign the separation agreement. Beverly sent a formal demand letter in October. She was precise about it, cited the specific contractual language, attached supporting documentation, stated the amount owed, and gave them 30 days to respond. The response that came back was not from HR. It was from an outside law firm, a firm with 4 names on the letterhead and offices in 3 cities. That told me something. You don't hire outside counsel for a frivolous claim. Their argument was exactly what Beverly had predicted. They contended that I had not been the primary technical lead on the Lakeview project. That role, they said, belonged to Greg. They attached an internal memo dated from 18 months prior designating Greg as project executive sponsor and lead representative. Beverly called me the same day she got it. "Do you have the proposal?" she said. "Which one?" "The technical proposal, the one submitted to the county." I had it. I had the final version, a draft from 4 months prior, and an email chain showing my edits and revisions over a period of nearly a year. I had the cover letter, which Greg had signed, but which I had written and which he had sent back to me with the comment in writing, "Looks great, just needs my signature." I also had something else, something I hadn't mentioned to Beverly yet because I wasn't sure if it was relevant. During the mobilization phase of Lakeview, Greg had sent me a text message, personal cell to personal cell, that said, "You're the reason we won this. I want you to know that." I had never deleted it. Beverly brought in a litigation partner from her firm, a man named Arthur who had spent 20 years doing employment law and had the particular kind of calm that comes from having seen everything twice. He reviewed the full file and told me that in his opinion we had a strong case and that the opposing counsel knew it. "They're going to try to settle," he said. "The question is when and for how much." "I want the full amount," I said. Arthur looked at me in the way that lawyers sometimes do when they're deciding whether to be honest with you. He decided to be honest. "You might get it," he said. "The text message is significant. The proposal metadata is significant. What would hurt you is if they can produce internal documentation assigning the lead role to Greg prior to the contract award." "The memo they attached is dated wrong," I said. He raised an eyebrow. I pulled up my spreadsheet. Not the billing one, a different one I had started keeping after Beverly sent the demand letter. "The memo is dated March 14th. I have an email from March 11th where Greg is asking me to finalize the site assessment addendum because, and I'm quoting, 'the proposal goes out next week and you're the only one who knows this stuff.'" Arthur smiled. It was a small smile. "Send me that email. There's a period in the middle of all this that I don't talk about much, because it's not the interesting part of the story, but it's the real part. My wife, Karen, knew everything. From the beginning, I came home the day I was let go, and I told her the whole thing over the kitchen table while the kids were at soccer practice. She listened, and then she said, "Do you trust Beverly?" "Yes." "Then let's do it." That was it. That was the whole conversation. I don't want to skip over that because I think it matters having someone at home who doesn't make the situation worse when it's already bad. We'd been together for 19 years by then. She knew how to read me and she knew when to be steady. The hard part wasn't the legal process. The hard part was the 4 months of not knowing. Going from a 6-figure salary to unemployment benefits, while a law firm with offices in 3 cities trying to argue that I hadn't done the job I'd spent 2 years doing. I picked up some consulting work through a former colleague, not enough to fully replace my income, but enough to keep the gap from being terrifying. I kept my routine. I got up at the same time. I went to the gym. I did not, under any circumstances, check LinkedIn more than once a day. I was angry, genuinely angry, in a way that I had to be careful with, not at Greg. Specifically, I had complicated feelings about Greg that I was still sorting through, mostly at the broader thing. The assumption that I would take the 22 weeks of severance and go quietly. The assumption that I didn't know what I was owed. That assumption was the mistake that cost them $2 million. The deposition requests went out in January. Arthur told me they were going to depose Greg, Irene the CFO, and 2 members of the external project team. I won't pretend I didn't think about what Greg would say. We had worked together for 9 years. He had mentored me in some ways early on. He was the reason I'd been promoted to director. I had eaten at his house twice. I knew his wife's name and the names of his kids. None of that had stopped him from sitting in that conference room and staring at the table. I don't know exactly what happened in his deposition. Arthur briefed me on the relevant parts. What I know is that Greg apparently had difficulty maintaining a consistent account of who had led the technical development of the proposal. His answers became vague when Arthur asked specific questions about the site assessment methodology. He could not name the specific regulatory framework I had used for the pressure monitoring upgrade specifications. He had not been the one who did that work. He couldn't pretend to have been, The second significant thing that happened in the deposition process was unrelated to my case directly, but not unrelated to me. One of the external project team members, a subcontractor supervisor, gave testimony that touched on billing practices. I don't know the specifics because it wasn't part of my claim. But Arthur mentioned it to me afterward, carefully, in the way you mention something that has implications beyond the conversation you're having. "You may want to talk to Beverly about your spreadsheet," he said. I had already talked to Beverly about my spreadsheet. About 2 weeks after the demand letter went out, Beverly had connected me with a friend of hers who specialized in financial regulatory matters. That conversation had led to a separate, quiet process that was running parallel to my employment claim. I will say this plainly, I did not set out to report anyone, but I also was not going to sit on documentation of $340,000 in billing irregularities on a federally connected infrastructure project and pretend I hadn't seen it. That's not who I am. The settlement offer came in February. It was for $900,000. I told Arthur to decline. He did not try to talk me out of it, which I appreciated. He did say, for the record, that $900,000 was a serious offer, and that litigation carried risk. I said I understood. He sent the declination. 3 weeks later, they came back with $1.6 million. I told Arthur to decline again. He paused on the phone for 2 seconds longer than the first time, but he sent it. The third offer came in early March, $1.9 million, plus a mutual non-disparagement agreement and confirmation in writing that my separation had been without cause. Beverly, Arthur, Karen, and I got on a call together. Beverly said the third offer was strong and that our litigation position, while solid, was never a certainty. Arthur said the written confirmation of no-cause termination had real value for my future employment. Karen said it was my decision. I asked if we could get the $2.04 million. Arthur said probably not the full amount, but that he could push for $2 million fat, which would require them to add $100,000 to their current position. He thought they might do it to close the matter. They did. On March 18th, I signed a settlement agreement for $2 million even. My legal fees came to approximately $180,000. The net to me was $1,820,000. I paid off the mortgage. I funded the kids' college accounts fully. I put the rest into a conservative investment portfolio that my financial advisor helped me structure. I cried in the car on the way home from Beverly's office. Not because of the money, or not only because of the money. Mostly because of the 11 years. Because of all the granola bars and early mornings and county roads I'd driven alone, doing work that mattered, and the way it had ended with a woman sliding a paper across a conference table like she was canceling a magazine subscription. It was over. And I had won. There's a postscript to this that I want to tell you because I think it's the part of the story that actually means something. There was a man on my team, I'll call him Pete, though that's not his real name, who had been at Meridian for 7 years. He was the one who had quietly confirmed for me, early on, that the billing discrepancies were real and not just my imagination. He never told me anything he wasn't allowed to tell me, but one afternoon in August, he had said, "You're not wrong about what you're seeing." And he had said it looking at his own shoes, and I had understood what that cost him. Pete was still employed at Meridian when the investigation into the billing irregularities expanded. I don't know exactly what happened internally. I don't have visibility into any of that. What I do know is that 2 months after my settlement, Pete called me. He said that things had gotten difficult for him since the investigation began, that he was in a complicated position. He asked if I knew of any openings. I had by then started consulting full-time under my own LLC. I had more work than I could handle alone. I brought Pete on as my first associate. He has been with me for 2 years now. He is excellent at his job. That call from Pete is the part of this I think about most. Not the conference room, not the settlement check, not even Beverly's voice saying they owe you $2,040,000. That call. You do the right thing. You protect your work. You fight for what you're owed, and then, if you're lucky, you get to be the person who picks up the phone when someone else needs a hand. That's the part no one puts in the separation agreement. I've thought a lot about what actually happened in that conference room. Not what was said, I remember every word of that, but what the people in that room believed about me when they slid that paper across the table. They believed I would be grateful for 22 weeks. They believed 11 years of work had left me too tired and too scared to read the fine print. They believed that the gap between what I was owed and what they were offering would feel too big to close, so I wouldn't try. That's the part that stays with me, not the betrayal of it. I've made my peace with Greg, or something close to it. What stays is the assumption. The quiet, confident assumption that I didn't know my own value well enough to fight for it. There's a cause and an effect running through everything I've told you. Greg approved subcontractors without oversight, and invoices got inflated. He sat in a room while I was let go and said nothing, and that silence set off a chain of events he couldn't control once it started. Every corner that got cut, every document that got dated wrong, every vague answer he gave in that deposition, none of it happened in isolation. It accumulated, and when the weight of it finally came down, it came down on the people who had built the shortcuts, not on the ones who had done the work. I don't think the world is automatically fair. I want to be clear about that. There are plenty of people who get cheated and never recover anything. I know that. What I had was documentation, a good attorney, and the discipline to not sign anything in a moment of fear. Those three things are not luck. They are choices. Choices I had made quietly, over years, without ever knowing I would need them. That's what I want you to take from this, if you take anything. The ethics of the thing, keeping honest records, flagging what I saw, refusing to pretend the billing irregularities weren't there. That wasn't strategy. I wasn't playing a long game. I was just trying to be the kind of professional I could respect when I looked in the mirror. The fact that it protected me later was a consequence of that, not the reason for it. The intelligence part was Beverly's clause, or rather, it was me being willing, 5 years earlier, to sit across a table from someone I liked and trusted and still say, I need this in writing. Not because I expected Greg to become someone who'd stare at a table while I was escorted to my desk, just because that's what careful people do. And Pete. I think about Pete a lot. He told me I wasn't wrong about what I was seeing, and it cost him something to say it, and he said it anyway. When he called me 2 months after my settlement, I didn't think twice. That call was the easiest decision I made in the whole 2 years of this. The courage to do the right thing when it's inconvenient. That's not a virtue reserved for exceptional people. It's a muscle. You build it by using it in small moments, long before anyone is watching. Pete used it in a hallway in August. I used it every time I updated that spreadsheet instead of closing my laptop and going home. What they forgot, what Greg forgot, what the lawyers forgot, is that quiet people keep receipts.